Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 8th and final chapter of the Song of Solomon, alternately known as the Song of Songs. In the first verse, it reads the Song of Solomon, Song of Songs, so both titles are valid. And this is one of the more controversial books of the Bible, namely because it discusses matters of intimate or sexual love within the broader framework of romantic love. And with the onset of the Cultural Revolution, the church was lax in addressing this subject, and I think it's one of the ones we cannot treat with benign neglect. And with the onslaught of pornography as a direct result of the sexual revolution, the pro-pornography party used this book to say that the Bible itself was pro-pornography, but nothing could be further from the truth. Sex is not necessarily sinful. God is the creator and controller of it, and as such, we reserve to him the prerogative to set its boundaries and limitations, and sex isn't sinful so long as it's in a heterosexual monogamous marriage. But the temptation is always palpable, and the way our society is set up these days, you're basically a loser if you do not graduate high school without losing your virginity. But we need to stress to the young people in our church that the best things in life are worth waiting for. And this book has invited a variety of interpretations. The predominant one all the way up till the 1800s was that it was an expression of the love that the Messiah had from its church for the church, and this interpretation was maintained by several early luminaries, Clement and Jerome, and it was maintained all the way up till Calvin and John Calvin and John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. But it wasn't until the 1800s until the majority of scholars began to look at it in a new light as simply an expression of love and a love story. This is an exchange of romantic expressions primarily between a young man identified as Solomon and a young woman who is the object of his affection and the apple of his eye. But even so, there was never any, strictly speaking, monolithic interpretation. I'm going to read a quote from Rabbi Sadiah, who wrote this, who lived from the years 882 to 942 A.D. Know, my brother, that you will find great differences in interpretation of the Song of Solomon. In truth, they differ because the Song of Songs resembles locks to which the keys have been lost. So within the sands of history, its original intent and meaning may have been perhaps lost, but its beauty is eternal, and its meaning is still open to interpret. As in any other book in the Bible, there is no one correct interpretation. We personally don't endorse the love that Christ, that the Messiah had for his church, namely because now the English language is in a lot of ways a limited language. The Greek language is a richer language. They have 4 terms which express which translate into our word of love, and this one most nearly captures eros, which is from which erotica derives. We've bastardized the word in our English language with erotica, but it describes both the emotional and physical components of romantic love, whereas the love of the Messiah more accurately translates as agape. And I did a lesson, 1 Corinthians 13. You can type in Corey Johnston, 1 Corinthians 13, the meaning on love for more on that. This was written in Hebrew, but it does contain elements of both Persian and Aramaic. And Solomon was a cosmopolitan king who spread the influence of Israel well beyond its boundaries, so some of those words may have crept in. And this form of literature was not unique to the Hebrew people. The Egyptians and the ancient Mesopotamians had similar ballads, but this is inspired and it is in scripture for a reason. And that being said, that's a longer than usual preamble. We're just going to open with the opening verse. But before we do that, we just want to explain that there are 4 cast of characters of 4 people. Solomon, who is the otherwise unanimous young man, accepting the opening verse of the opening chapter. The young woman, who is a Shumanite, and she's identified as black. She was an African, although Solomon did have, we read in 1 Kings 11, that he did have 700 700 wives and 300 women in his harem. So he would have had, in all likelihood, had interracial marriage, because the 700 wives would have been selected primarily because of political usefulness rather than, and the woman in the harem would have been selected primarily for physical attractiveness. But this is the earliest of the 3 books which are attributed to Solomon. And before I get on that, I just want to introduce the other characters. There's the young women of Jerusalem, who function as a chorus. So this was a song. It was meant to be sung, although we do read it as prose, and it does have value as such. And also the young woman's brothers, the Shumanite women. And as I mentioned earlier, this is one of the 3 books attributed to Solomon's authorship, the others being Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. And Song of Solomon is generally believed to represent the early years of his life, where and the Proverbs reflect the middle years. In the book of Ecclesiastes represents the mature musings of Solomon. And some scholars do classify this book as wisdom literature, the idea being that even though it's unbecoming for a king or anyone else to say anything foolish, it is commensurate with a wise life to say sappy, sentimental, and stupid things in the private company of your beloved other. And we don't have a dog in that fight. We just wanted to present its existence. Any idiot can fall in love, but it is also an emotion and a feeling which is not foreign to wise and intelligent people. So that's a really long preamble. We're going to open with the opening verse. These are the words of the young woman, the Shumanite, who sings, "Who would make you a brother to me, who nursed at my mother's breast? Should I find you outside, I would kiss you. I would not be despised." By contemporaneous convention, this is true in virtually every culture. It is not befitting of civilized protocol to engage in what we call PDAs, public displays of affection, but there would have been no qualms in kissing one's brother in public. So unrestrained and uninhibited is her romantic yearning for this man, Solomon, that she feels suppressed by being in public and being unable to kiss him as she would like. Certainly she wouldn't French kiss her brothers, but we just want to understand the difference in that. "I would lead you, I would bring you into the house of my mother, she who has taught me. I would give you spiced wine to drink, of the juice of my pomegranates. His left hand is under my head, and his right hand embraces me. I have put you under oath, O daughters of Jerusalem. Do not stir up or awake. Love until it pleases." So this love was all-consuming and omnipresent in her affection, and and the young women of Jerusalem referenced are going to read the opening half of the 5th verse. But the span of range we just read are generally recognized to be expressions of love. The 2nd verse continues on the 1st, expressing her regret that he was not a household member or a member of her immediate family just at that moment in time, because she had to wait until private intimacy to engage in romantic activity with him. And the young women of Jerusalem, who remember function as a chorus. This was a song to be sung, although we do read it as prose, and it has poetic elements, but I'll read their portion first, and then I'll read when it returns to the young woman speaking. So the young women of Jerusalem, plural to be distinct from the young woman, sing, "Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved?" So there's an aspect or element of mystery in the identity of the one who is coming up from the wilderness, and his intent is clear. He is leaning on the object of his love. And then the young woman of the Shumanite reads, "Under the apple tree I awakened you. There your mother was in labor with you. There she was in labor, gave birth to you. Put me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is as strong as death, jealousy as cruel as the grave. Its flames are flames of fires, a flame of Yah." So there's a lot to digest in that 6th verse. The seal was a sign of ownership, whereby one would indicate via a seal, a physical seal, that something belonged to them, and we saints are marked by the seal of the Spirit, indicative of our salvation. And love is as strong as death. Now, the powers and forces of evil are never awake, never asleep. They are always awake, and we witness that in the pro-pornography, using our lax attention to the righteous element of safe and non-sinful sex against us, when the church was largely asleep on addressing this important issue. This isn't something we should treat with benign neglect, but the forces of love are stronger, in fact stronger than death. So those are both very powerful forces in the cosmic struggle of good and evil, but love ultimately triumphs. And jealousy, now it is written of God that he is alternately a jealous God, somewhere in Exodus, the 20th chapter of Exodus, and also in Nahum 1:3. And jealousy is distinct from envy. Envy is invariably sinful. It is likened by several Greek philosophers as the origin of all evil. But to be jealous, now God is certainly he's a self-sufficient creature. He needs nothing. He wants nothing. There's nothing we can give him. But so why did he create us? And the answer is that it is an act of love. But he is certainly jealous over his name, his people, his church, and his will. And the flames, now she's likening the love which burns in her heart to flames, and it is divinely inspired. These are identified as flames of Yah, that being Yahweh the Father. So there's really... that's just an all-consuming passion. We often liken the emotions which excite our passions and inflame our hearts to fire and flames. Many waters are unable to extinguish love, and floods do not wash it away. If I would give all the wealth of his house for love, it would be utterly scorned. So this is, again, her love is compared to a force of nature, waters, which is likened to the Spirit alternately. And the love that she has is burning so inside her that even all the water in the world would be insufficient to quench the fire which is in her heart. And she love is an incomparable treasure. You cannot put a price on it. Although the diamond industries certainly convince you that you can. It's generally believed to be an expression of love, how much you expend on a wedding ring. And I think that was invented by the Dutch. They ran a campaign, the Dutch mining conglomerate, sometime in the 1900s, that it was to be a third of, or a 3-month salary equivalent. And so the actual fact is that wedding rings are a relatively new item in marriage, the marriage process. And we have this is where the brothers of the young woman, the Shumanites, start singing, and they sing, "We have a little sister, and she has no breast. What do we do for our sister in the day when she is spoken for?" So brothers and fathers were to be the trusted guardians of the sexual purity of the young females in their house, and she is a virgin. Now, Solomon certainly wasn't. He it wasn't until the 11th chapter of Kings we read of a righteous life who was wholly committed to the work and will of the Father, and then almost inexplicably he succumbs to the love of his foreign wives and their idolatrous gods. He allows them to set up shop in Jerusalem, whereas the earliest bride mentioned in 1 Kings 3:1 is the daughter of Pharaoh. He built her a palace outside of the confines of Jerusalem so that she could worship her deities without contaminating the moral fiber of Jerusalem, but he got lax in his old age and ultimately expired prematurely at the age of 59 because when he was 19 years old, he was visited in a dream after offering sacrifices. You can read of it in 2 Chronicles 1 and 1 Kings 3, and his answer for the wisdom to rule not only any nation, but the covenant nation on the promised people, the chosen people of the Almighty maker of heaven and earth. So he was aware of the task and he asked for the wisdom to do it. And because he did not ask for wealth or the death of his enemies, Yahweh granted him those wishes too, but these were unconditional elements of the covenant he had entered into with Solomon. But there was a conditional one that inasmuch as he followed the path of his father David, he would have long life. Sadly, 40 years later, we witness him meriting his demise on account of his idolatry, and so he ruled 40 years, the same length as David, but David ascended to the throne at age 30. He died at 70. If she is a wall, we built upon her a battlement of silver, and if she is a door, we would enclose her with boards of cedar. So these are two physical similitudes used to respectively represent a level of sexual openness for a woman. So a wall would have been resistant to she was a beautiful woman. She probably had several overtures from horny men trying to get in her pants, but a wall would be a repellent function to the sexual advances of men. And door would have been likened to just someone who goes around as a matter of course and has sex with everything in sight, if interpreted to its most extreme element. And the young woman returns to singing in the 10th through 12th verses, which read, I am a wall, and my breasts like towers. So I became in his eyes as one who found peace. So she assures her brothers that she is sexually pure. She has her virginity undefiled and preserved intact, and her breasts were likened to, in the 8th verse, her brother said she had no breasts, but here she likens them to towers. In other words, she had large mammaries, which are, at least in our historical generation, an item of attraction for men and women, and she became the object and the apple of his eye, which Yahweh uses in reference to Israel in Deuteronomy 32:11. That's not explicitly there, but one who found peace. There is peace in married love, and Solomon's name, the suffix is... The name itself is derived from the Hebrew term shalom, which indicates more than an absence of conflict, although we generally translate it as peace. Once more, this is one of the instances where another language, remember the Greek is a richer language for the terminologies of love. Hebrew is likewise a richer language than the English one in the term, as measured by the terms of peace. So shalom indicates more than the absence of conflict. It also indicates a wholeness and well-being and a prosperity, be it spiritual and or temporal. Solomon had a vineyard in Baal Haman. He let out the vineyard to keepers. Each one was to bring for its fruit 1,000 pieces of silver. So Solomon would have been the largest landowner in Israel as the king, and he is, according to figures adjusted to inflation, it's not an exact science, but reliable estimates would have placed him as one of the history's trillionaire rulers. Another one would have been Caesar Augustus and several others. So the accounts of the amount of gold which flowed into his city in the first book of Kings, historical and archaeological evidence suggests that they were not exaggerated. And as the keeper of the vineyard, it would have been to produce fruits, and it would have had a price. So silver was indicative of money. They lived in pre-money age. It wasn't until the Lydians, the grandfather of Croesus, who invented coinage. Much before that, prior to then, the ancient world functioned on a barter system, but gold and silver would have had recognized monetary value. My own vineyard is before me, O Solomon. 1,000 belongs to you, and 200 to those who keep its fruit. So she's measuring her vineyard of love in relatable measurements, and we finally hear from Solomon in the 13th verse. So the majority of the antecedent chapters consist of an exchange of expressions of love between these two lovers, but in the 8th chapter, the protagonist appears to be the Shunammite, and Solomon sings, You who sit in the gardens, the companions listen for your voice. Let me hear it. So he's eager to hear her voice. He longs for her company or any indication that speaking, breathing, seeing her would have been paramount concern for one who is so love-stricken. And the young women of the Shumanite closes with the final passage, "Hurry, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountain of spaces." So we gather that there was an urgency for the romantic exchange of love, so much so that she encouraged him to hurry. She literally could not wait and likened it to a gazelle, which is recognized as an animal of some speed. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're here. Stay tuned till next time. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.